My name is Jenn Bouchard, and I live in the Boston suburbs. I've been teaching high school social studies for 22 years, and I published my debut novel, First Course, this June. Prior to that, I had published 4 short stories in literary journals, but this was my first novel. It is a story set on the coast of Maine primarily. It is a bit of a family saga kind of story, but with a lot of humor and really good food included. There is a love story central to the book with a few other little love stories on the side with some of my other characters and lots of things that go on with them. And I am working now on my second novel that is called Palms on the Cape, and this one is set on Cape Cod.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Yang, and I live in Texas. I am a debut author from this year. My first book, A Taste for Love, came out in February of this year, and I am also in 2 short story anthologies, Together Apart, which is actually a collection of stories about finding love during COVID, and the other one is Every Body Shines, which is a collection of body positive stories, also about finding love when you are bigger than average. Let's put it that way. I have my sophomore book is called Love Decoded, and that will be coming out in spring of next year. So A Taste for Love was originally pitched as Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice meets the Great British Bake Off, or Great British Baking Show now it's called, if Mrs. Bennet and the Bennets were Asian parents and an Asian family. So there's definitely a lot of great food, and the baking is all going to be Asian twists on European confections and European pastries. And it's just a lot of fun, a lot of laughs, and definitely a lot of drama.
You know, as I was approaching 40 a while back, I started to think about something else that I could do while still working in my same job that would kind of fill a creative need that I had. And I love to cook, and that just wasn't doing it. I think part of it was because I was just cooking so much out of necessity for my family that I wasn't able to be as creative as I wanted to be as often as I could. And I had this idea of writing a novel. I hadn't written anything in terms of fiction since middle school. So I really had no idea what I was doing. And I started playing around with ideas, knowing that there would be a cooking element that was really central to the story. And I started listening to other authors, going to interviews and readings with them, hearing about their publishing stories, and learning a lot more about how the industry worked while I kind of chipped away at this thing. It took me 2.5 years to write a first draft. You know, I started with my initial ideas in the summer of 2014, and here we are 7 years later with a published novel. So I don't think the second one's going to take me as long.
I've actually always been a writer. I started out as a reader, and I think a lot of writers would say the same thing. Started out as a bookworm, lived and breathed the library. And I just, one of the things that I think I unconsciously remember, and I think it came to the surface as I got older, was that as much as I enjoyed the books that I read, I didn't really see myself reflected in any of them. And I decided to come into and try my hand at publishing right around the time that diversity, initiatives were started, and I was, I caught it right on the cusp of it kind of exploding onto the publishing industry, and I'm glad for that, because I always secretly wanted to become a writer, but like most good Asian kids with very tiger Asian parents, I went the non-creative route and went into medicine. But I always wanted to write. I could continue to write, mostly fan fiction initially, because I'm a big sci-fi and fantasy geek as well. But deep down inside, I always wanted to see my name on a book, on a shelf. And so, after writing a kind of a fic if anybody knows what that is, I basically fixed the ending to one of a book that I just was like totally dissatisfied with and shared it with some friends. They were like, you totally need to try publishing because we love this and we think it should have been the original ending. So on a whim, essentially, I decided to pursue it more seriously. And I was very, very lucky that, you know, my path and my journey has been quite short in comparison to a lot of people. But A Taste for Love was a lightning in a bottle kind of situation. I had started out writing contemporary and I was writing fantasy and sci-fi, and it just wasn't quite clicking in my attempts to query and find an agent and find representation. But I've always loved rom-coms. I'm a hopeless romantic, and, you know, I'm like, for me, it's such a go-to comfort activity to watch or read a rom-com. And so I decided to give it a shot after I saw this Twitter post back in like 2000 and, oh wow, how long was it? 2018, I think it was, maybe 19. I've already lost track of time. Where it was basically this, I saw this Twitter post show up on book Twitter, and it was just someone saying that it was a college police bulletin that said, be on the lookout for a middle-aged Asian woman walking around campus approaching male students, asking for them to take a look at pictures of her daughter and consider dating her. And the very first thing I thought of was, this has got to be an Asian mom. Like, there is no way that this is not an Asian mom. And at the time, we didn't even know what she looked like. But later on, someone followed up on the post and added surveillance pictures. And indeed, it was an Asian mom. And so that kind of was what's kind of really grabbed me. And at the time, I was binge watching seasons of Great British Baking Show because I love baking and I love that very soothing way that they handle competition. You know, it's very cordial. And it's very educational because you learn about different techniques and, you know, like utensils and baking methods. And so I think it just kind of hit me that I could try something that would combine the two. And I'm an Austinite for sure. So that was just kind of the last piece of the puzzle. And that's how A Taste for Love came to being. And I drafted it much faster than everything I've ever drafted in my life, and was very fortunate to find an editor who really loved the book and championed it for me. So here I am, and I'm just really glad that I had that happen, and hopefully it won't be a one-time thing. Yeah, so I'm just very lucky that happened. I think one of the things that a lot of people have started to understand, and that those of us who were raised in an Asian household understand, is that our parents do not express love in a very Western way. They're not usually very physically affectionate. They don't say words like "I'm proud of you" or "I love you." That's just not how that's expressed. How your parents express love is through food. It's their love language. And so a lot of times, you know, if they're proud of you, they will cook your favorite food. If they miss you, they will cook your favorite food. If you got into a huge fight, but they don't want to say they're sorry, they will cook you your favorite food. There's like a pattern here if you catch on. You know, they could give you a cold shoulder for 3 days, but you'll know the fight is over when they cook you food you want to eat. So, and even when we have major celebrations, birthdays, weddings, funerals, food is always involved. When you reunite with, long family members you haven't seen in a long time, or even when you go out to hang out with friends, food is central to every social activity that we have. It's social to every day of our lives. So it may perfect sense, and it would be completely irrational of me not to include food and family in the same story when I'm centering an Asian American character, because it wouldn't be true to who she is and who her family is without those things. But I think it's not just an Asian culture thing. I think every family has a degree of that as their love language, and it's also very universal. So it kind of helps people who may not be familiar with the Asian culture, who don't have any Asian people in their lives, to connect with the characters in a way that's very fundamentally human. So I think that was another reason why I made sure that those things were centered in the story.
I think food just brings people together, and there's a lot of nostalgia with food, and that is something that the characters keep coming back to in the story. I remember the time that we ate this, or there's a great story around Chicago deep dish pizza in the story. And there are memories that characters continue to refer to about, the time you made this for me. When things are bad, when the main character Janie has a really terrible day, she goes home to her apartment in Chicago. This is before we're in Maine, and she just starts pulling things out of the refrigerator and throwing things together and serving food to her friends, and making them drinks, and they know that she will always do that for them, and that's something they associate her with, and she is that person to so many people, her friends and her family. So I think, and we all have those people in our lives who we know if they make something, it's just going to be incredible, and so she is that person. And then there are people who aren't very good at this, and I did touch on that in the story as well. People who have strange flavor combinations and make things that just kind of revolt you, and I created a somewhat comical character in the next door neighbor Meredith Ashton, and some of her strange food choices. So that was a lot of fun to write to as well. Of course, people keep asking me, they're like, so who is she? Who's Meredith Ashton? I'm like, not anyone that she's a mix of a lot of traits. So I think just kind of playing around with food. I also thought a lot when I was writing the book about the character, and she's in her mid-20s, and I thought about the kinds of things I liked to serve to my friends when I was her age, when I was first really learning how to cook well. And so that was, I thought for me, it was a little bit nostalgic too, to really think, to put myself in that mindset again.
I think one of the things that I unintentionally, or at least unconsciously, did was that I made A Taste for Love multiple love stories. And yes, there is a central romantic love between Liza and her main character and her love interest James, but there's also familial love, there's friendship love or platonic love, there's her love or passion for baking. So I think what I wanted to do with A Taste for Love was to show that no matter what situation you're in, no matter who you are, no matter what your background is, love exists in your life, and you just have to see it. And sometimes it shows up in ways that you don't think about, or you don't expect, or you don't necessarily even identify as love. So one of the things that Liza had to learn about love was actually the way that her mom expresses love. And because that was a central conflict for them, they had a lot of headbutting over this situation, because she felt like her mom was overbearing and very strict, and would not allow her to pursue what she felt she loved. But in reality, her mother was just very protective and was very concerned about her not wanting her child to be hurt or to suffer failure. So that was her way of showing love. But I think also one of the other things is learning that first impressions don't always pan out. And with James, for example, that their love grows over time, and it kind of hits her in an unexpected place, and it's because she had already kind of these judgment on him as to what kind of person he is. But I think in terms of just answering why are love stories important to have during turbulent times, is because love is what ties all of us together. It's something that I think the vast majority of people want in their lives in some form. Now, it may not be romantic love, but everyone wants to feel connected to someone else in a meaningful way. And I think when we currently live in a situation where that's not what we tend to encounter, we don't tend to see anything about it, and it's not something that people get to focus on. Rom-coms and love stories are a great way to remind ourselves to be optimistic, and that there is hope in the world, and we just have to focus on the right things.
There are so many different kinds of love that are expressed in First Course. There is the sort of central love story where Janie realizes that what she had before wasn't the right thing for her, and she meets Rocky, who is so good for her in so many ways. But she's also helping her sister go through a separation of sorts with her husband, and helping her figure out what their love is about, and what the future holds for it. There's also the love that they have to kind of channel into a way to remember their parents who they've lost and what that will ultimately look like. There's a love of food for certain throughout the whole book, and all the things, all the nostalgia, all the memories that get tied in with that. I've often called First Course a love letter to Maine as well. I fell in love with Maine. I went to college in Maine. I spent a ton of time on the coast when I was there. And over the last 8 years since we've lived back in the Boston area, we've gone up to Maine with our kids a lot, gotten to kind of see Maine through their eyes. And I wanted to express that in a book as well, about my love for the state and all the things that it's meant to me. I had a childhood where I moved a ton. My father was in the military, and until I went to college, I had never lived anywhere for longer than 2 or 3 years. And when I got to spend 4 years in a place that I really learned to love with my whole heart, it has been the place I always go back to. So that's part of the love that it's expressed in First Course too, is the love letter to Maine. So there is a breakfast situation where Janie has to throw something together with next to no notice. And she has to, her kind of constituents in the situation, she's got her 2 little nieces who are 3 and 5 in the house. She has her sister who doesn't cook at all. So she's got to feed her. And she's got Rocky, who is having breakfast with her for the first time. And he's asleep on a hammock outside. And people will learn more about that when they read the book. She throws together these biscuits and makes the house smell fantastic very quickly. So these biscuits they're something that I have adapted quite a bit over the last few years based on lots of people's recipes and made them my own, especially over the last year and a half or so when I've been making lots of food for my family. These biscuits have been a fan favorite of my kids. So it's very straightforward. You need 2 cups of flour, teaspoon of kosher salt, teaspoon of sugar, and a tablespoon of baking powder. And if you are using a stand mixer, this is super easy. Otherwise, you could certainly do this in a mixing bowl with a pastry cutter or a hand mixer. But if you've got all those ingredients, you put them in the bowl, and you will then add 1 stick of unsalted butter that you've diced and kept cold. And if you're using a mixer at this point, you can get that going, and you want the butter to be about the size of peas. Once that's where you want it to be, you add in a cup of buttermilk. And you've already preheated your oven. I should have said that. You preheated your oven to 400 degrees, and you've lined a sheet pan with parchment paper. So you can then dump out your dough onto a floured board, and you can cut it out with a biscuit cutter, or if you don't have that, you could certainly use a floured drinking glass. Any size you want's fine. Cooking time will just depend on the size of your biscuits. But here's the trick. Here's what I found. Now, Janie didn't have time for this because she had to get breakfast out for everybody. But if you've got the time, once you've got the cut out biscuits on the sheet pan, stick the sheet pan in the refrigerator for a little bit. If you've got about 15 minutes, you can do it for longer, but if you've got 15 minutes to put it in the refrigerator, it makes the biggest difference in the biscuits. So you're going to bake them for about 20 minutes, more or less, depending on the size of those biscuits, and keep an eye on them to make sure they don't burn. But putting them in the refrigerator for between 15 minutes and an hour, they're fantastic. So enjoy.
So the recipe I want to introduce is called a red velvet cupcake with cream cheese filling and frosting. It's actually a recipe I found online a few years back because I was getting ready to go to a holiday party and had promised to bring dessert, but I was super short on time and needed something that I could make that wasn't going to require everything
done by scratch. So I really love this recipe because it allows you to use a store-bought, right off the shelf cake mix, but also put a little bit of an extra oomph in the actual frosting because you're making that part from scratch. So the recipe actually calls for the cupcake part to be made from a box cake mix, which I personally just go to the store and I buy like the red velvet cupcake mix. You can get whatever brand you like most and just follow the instructions on the back of the box. Usually it'll call for water, vegetable oil, and eggs in addition to the box mix. And then you just follow the instructions on it precisely for cupcakes, because if you notice on the back of the box, it always says instructions for like a cake in a pan and then also cupcakes. So you want to follow the cupcake one when it comes to the baking time and when to check if your cupcakes are done. So follow the instructions, and once the cake is actually baked or the cupcake is baked, put the pan aside, let the cupcakes cool, and you can move on to frosting. So now the frosting is going to be 12 ounces of cream cheese that you will have out and have softened in advance. Also a 1/3 cup of butter. You could do margarine as well. I personally like butter. I think it tastes really better, a lot better with butter. You can soften that as well. If you're really in a crunch, you can technically microwave both the cream cheese and the butter, but you have to watch it very carefully and check it every few seconds because it can go from like soft to liquid very quickly, and you don't want it actually at the liquid form. Also 1 tablespoon of vanilla, 9 cups of powdered sugar, and 1 to 3 tablespoons of milk. So with the actual cream cheese, you want to use a large bowl. You want to beat the cream cheese, butter, and vanilla with an electric mixer on high speed, or if you have a hand mix, you have to do it by hand. Just go as fast as you can until you have a nice fluffy consistency. Once you get to that point, you want to gradually add parts of the powdered sugar and continue beating until it's smooth. And you do that until you're completely done with all of the powdered sugar. Then you want to beat in 1 tablespoon of the milk. And if you need to add more, just until the frosting is kind of in a nice piping consistency. So you want it thick, but not like solid. Now, if you don't happen to have a frosting bag, like a piping bag, which means you have the bag as well as the frosting tip, the tip that goes with it. I've actually, in a crunch, used Ziploc bags with one corner cut out. Don't want to cut too large of a hole, but also not too small of a hole. So you can test it out by cutting a smaller hole and then squeezing a little bit of the frosting out just to see what you're getting, and then kind of size it up a little bit at a time. If you don't have a piping bag, which a lot of times, I think we don't always have sitting around at home. Once you have the bag to the right consistency, go ahead and spoon in your frosting. Although if you have the bag and you're cutting a hole, spoon the frosting in first before you cut the hole. And make sure you put that aside. Now, what you can also do then is you want to cut a hole in the center of your cupcakes. Now, I have a core tool that I use that's really handy, and it's literally for cupcakes. You just punch a hole in the middle and it takes out the middle of the cupcake. If you don't have that, you can always use a spoon to kind of make a little circular center hole in the middle of every one of your cupcakes. And by the way, like sometimes having that is great. Save it to the side, because if you're like me, the center pieces are amazing to eat when they're still hot, and I will like chow down on that while I'm baking. Now, once the holes are made, you want to take your piping bag and you want to actually insert the tip into the cupcake at least about halfway down, and then slowly squeeze the bag and pull it upwards as you see the filling enter into the center of the hole. And once you get to the top, then what you could do is you would basically make circles going outward to finish frosting the top of the cupcake. Once you've done that for one of them, you can continue to do that for each one following that. Alternately, you could just fill each hole and then go back and top the frosting. But personally, I just go ahead and do it for each, so it's quick and it's done. Now keep in mind before you add the frosting, because it has powdered sugar, it is a little bit easy to melt. So make sure that your cupcakes are completely cool before you do this, because if you don't, it'll all basically melt and separate and it will not be nice. Once you finish frosting the cupcakes, you can decorate it as you see fit. If you want to add sprinkles or if you want to add, other decorations, you're welcome to do that. You can also color the frosting if you want. You would do that before you fill the cupcakes. But that's it. That is your red velvet cupcakes with cream cheese filling and frosting. It's quick and easy, very, very fun to make, and it always goes over really, really well at parties. So I hope you guys enjoy it.
Oh, it's Rocky, because no one would ever suspect Rocky McCallan of murder. My mom had a friend who was reading it until 1 a.m. one night, and then she texted my mom and said, "I'm in love with Rocky McCallan." So I don't think that anyone would ever suspect him of any wrongdoing.
James. And I say James not just because he's the guy and he's the obvious answer, but also because he tends to keep his feelings bottled up. And so whereas Liza is very good about expressing how she feels, whether it's ranting, to her, or venting to Grace and her friends, or getting mad and beating a piece of dough to submission, she's not the type that will hold it all in. And so cold shower doesn't make sense to her. Because she wouldn't need that kind of relief, let's put it that way. Whereas James tends to keep everything very close to the vest, and he doesn't really talk about his feelings. Very few people actually know what he's thinking. And so I think, if anything, if he got super frustrated for any reason, he would be much more likely to take that cold shower.
Oh, Janie for sure. She stays up late, looking up her ex-boyfriend online. So I could definitely, and she got very aggravated by things that she found out by doing that. So I could definitely see her doing that.
Oh, okay. So the thing is that the name that came to my head is not one of the two characters. So I will give you the answer for the cuckold, but I will also give you the answer that I think is actually the case in the 4 main characters in the group. But between, I think, Liza and James, it would definitely be more likely to be Liza. And the reason why I say that is because she's the type that would be up late at night, and she does at one point in the book stay up late working on a recipe. So she would be the one more likely to be sleep deprived and the more likely to fall asleep in mid bus ride. And also just because I could totally see her doing that, and then have Mrs. Yang come over and just chew her out and really, really upset that she missed her bus stop. But I think, honestly, of the 4 main characters, because Grace is Liza's best friend, and Ben is her love interest and also James's cousin, Ben is the most likely of the 4 of them to do that. Just because he's, everyone loves him. He's a wonderful guy. He's a big teddy bear, but he can get a little bit spacey sometimes. And so I think of the 4 of them, he's the most likely to do it. Or even if he might just be the type that gets into a deep conversation with someone next to him on the bus and completely missing his stop because he's just so enthralled with the conversation. So he's that kind of guy.
I can see both of them doing that. They're both caretakers. Rocky is a guidance counselor at a high school, so he is used to listening to teenagers tell him their problems all day. I think he definitely took care of his single mother in certain ways when he was growing up, and Janie takes care of her whole family, and sometimes at her detriment. She's prone to getting used a bit. So I would say both of them.
I think that the readers would assume I would say Liza. I really do think it would be both, but I think James would be an unexpected one. So he would cry at something you would not expect him to cry at. I think Liza would be the type that would get emotional at most movies, most feel good movies, she would cry. Like I, to some degree, I feel like Liza and I are very, very similar. And so like I cry every time I watch Mr. Holland's Opus. It's an oldie but a goodie. When the doors open to the auditorium and all his former students are there, like I bawl like a little baby. And she would be that type. She would be the type to like get very emotional about like uplifting storylines and things like that. I think James would surprise people because he does kind of keep everything very close. And he does not wear his heart on his sleeve, but he's actually very emotional and very loyal and very loving. So he would be the type that I was just reading something about Big Hero 6. He would be the type that would cry when Baymax has to say goodbye to Hero and in order to save him. He would be the one you would like turn and look at, and all of a sudden he's got this lone tear like dripping down his face. He would be that guy, but he would never show it unless he trusted you. So like he would show it to Liza and he would trust Liza with that. But he's that kind of guy where like it's something that you would never expect him to cry at, but he would be the one with like trying to hold it all together.
I've got to say it's not either one of them. It's one of my secondary characters for sure. So it's Kate Heathcliff. She is someone who works at the college that the liberal arts college that I invented, and is kind of the main contact who Janie's working with in the development office as they try to figure out how to memorialize her parents. And she's the reason why Janie and Rocky really do meet each other, because they end up working at a college fair together just through this mix-up. And she is constantly falling over herself, spilling things, putting her foot in her mouth. Absolutely, she would get stranded somewhere, without a doubt.
I think I'm gonna have to go back to another secondary character, but I'll still follow the rules and choose between Liza and James. I would say both in different ways. Liza would be the type that would buy a bunch of little kitschy things, or she would like dump money into like fancy baking utensils and tools, because that's her thing, that's her passion, right? So like she would fall all over herself over the latest gadget, or the latest KitchenAid like mixer attachment. That would be her. That's where her money would go. Or she would buy a lot of boba tea, so enough to last her a lifetime. James, on the other hand, he would spend the money. He would spend a lot because the things he likes are all very like high quality, luxurious stuff. His family is very well off, and he's kind of grown up in this environment where you buy the best quality things. So he would never bat an eye at dropping money for something super fancy. So in that sense, both of them would, but in very different ways. But if we're talking like 100% the biggest shopper, it would be Grace. Liza's best friend, because she's all about fashion. She's all about fashion, beauty. Like she's kind of like, if she chose to, she would be that Instagram influencer, like, because that's just kind of her personality. And she loves having the, the latest thing and the nicest thing off the catwalk. And so she would definitely be the biggest shopaholic of the four of them.
I could see Janie doing some sort of cooking show eventually. Not right away. It's not where she would be at. There's a lot of things that she wants to do first, but I could see that happening down the road. She's got the temperament for that. She loves to share her cooking with people. So I could see that happening. In terms of secondary characters, it's Cole. It's her ex, without a doubt. And he's even dating a reality star actress, slash actress at some point in the book. So, and his life is sort of a reality show. So I could see that happening if we were going to go in a secondary direction, for sure.
I would say Liza, only because she doesn't hold her feelings back. There is a moment in kind of not quite middle of the book where she finds out what her mom is up to with the baking competition, and she kind of melts down in the middle of a potion. But so she does have a little bit tendency to get a little dramatic, and more likely to do so in public, whereas James, again, because he's so concerned about how people perceive him, he's very restrained. But I think if I were to do secondary characters, I would actually probably say Liza's sister Jane actually is much more likely to be the one that's cry. She's sensitive, she's very soft, people protect her a lot, so she's kind of that more naive, innocent type that can be easily hurt, but she would cry super prettily because she's a model, so yeah. She's not going to be the blubbering type. she's gonna be the real pretty type, and people would probably just assume she was like filming a commercial or a movie or something as she's crying in public. And probably, people would come out of the woodworks to offer tissues and like fix whatever, she's that kind of type.
I'm Jenn Bouchard.
Again, my name is Jennifer Yang.
And my book, First Course, is available at any independent bookstore. If it's not in stock there, you can request it and they can order it for you. It's available on Amazon, Target.com as well. You can find me at jennbouchard.com and on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all at Jenn Bouchard BOS, and that's for Boston.
You can find me on social media. I am technically on a website, jennyenwrites.com. I will admit that thing is probably like a year old and I haven't updated it because I'm primarily active on social media. My handle is the same, JENYEN Writes, at Twitter, Instagram. I do have a TikTok. I mostly troll on TikTok, but maybe going forward I will post something. But in the meantime, you can still follow me. I am active on there. I'm just mostly, wasting time on TikTok. But A Taste for Love has been out since February, as I said. It's available pretty much anywhere you can find a book. You can also request it if it's not physically in a bookstore that you're close to. And don't forget that you can also borrow them at the library. So if your local library does not have A Taste for Love, you can actually request it. It is a young adult book, so you can just ask them to bring it in. I'm sure they would be happy to do so. And I'd support your local libraries and your independent bookstores. And of course, Love Decoded is coming out in spring of next year. It's actually, if you end up loving A Taste for Love, the main character for Love Decoded is James's younger sister Gigi, and it is an Emma retelling with a STEM twist. So I hope that you guys will look forward to that as well.